So we probably should start with the hip hinging section, discussing really why we do it so dramatically different than probably what a lot of you are seeing. Now, what's interesting about the fitness industry is that things can change rather rapidly. So just because something's familiar now doesn't mean we do it completely differently in a couple of months from now, especially as we think more in context about how our body actually functions. So we don't do a lot of the bridging with the weight upon our hips. I'm going to show you in a moment why we do not do that. But it doesn't have anything to do with the implement itself, because it would be very easy for us as a company that offers equipment to say, hey, just put the ultimate sandbag upon your hips and just thrust, go to town, it's awesome. It actually feels even more comfortable than using a barbell, sold, right? It just wouldn't be doing you guys a good service, because that's not what we're trying to do with the idea of DBRT in our LIFT program. So the big difference that we're trying to convey to people is that we're trying to improve through functional training how the body functions. So when we talk about glute training, we have to go and talk about the fact that A, the glutes are stimulated a lot by what we do with our feet. Okay, none of us hopefully walk down the street and just all of a sudden our glutes start squeezing and that projects ourselves forward. What happens when we walk through space is the interaction with the ground and up the connected chain of our body. So the feet are super important, but the other part too is obviously the connection of these different connected chains. And the one we've been speaking specifically about is this posterior oblique system. The idea that my lat speaks to my core, speaks to my glutes through my thoracolumbar fascia. That's why when I walk in opposites, I create spinal stability, is to what happens with the lat, core, and glute together. So if you realize that, and you realize that the glute works in conjunction with the feet and these chains, you now start to understand why the hip bridge with a weight upon the pelvis is probably not optimal. Now, when I say that, okay, I know for whatever reason this gets people very upset. I'm not really sure why. We're just trying to give you guys a different perspective. People like this, number one, because they can lift a lot of weight. It's a very mechanically advantageous position to do work in. So again, people can lift a lot of load. But as you guys know, numbers do lie. So again, one of the things you gotta look for is a lot of people don't feel like they'll feel their glutes and they assume that their glutes are getting stronger. I'm sure they are to some degree. I don't think we can sort of discount completely the idea that if you isolate a muscle, it doesn't get stronger at all. The key is, can we do a better job? So time and time again, when we show people how when they connect their lat, core, and glutes together, they actually get better hip extension. They get better movement out of their glutes. I think is a point we're trying to drive home. It's not just about the burn you create. It's about the integration of the chains that become more important. So while you may feel this, and this is still good if you want a good backside, I guess, to me it's not the optimal way of doing a hip bridge, and we've set forth some good progressions for you guys in the following series with lots of different tools. So what I'm talking about is this. So in a barbell hip bridge, if I'm doing it from, let's say, a bench position, if I take my hands away, or if I keep my weight here and doing this motion, I definitely feel my glutes. So I'm not discounting that you'll feel glute interaction, but I feel absolutely no core or no lat engagement. And you notice when I come up, it's actually kind of what my body wants to go into, a little bit of rib flare. I'm not getting stability through any other part of my body. And as people sort of increase the load, the more they try to leverage back into the movement. Now, you could blame that. That was graceful. You can blame that on poor technique, which obviously is definitely something we can always talk about. But more importantly, just trying to optimize how the body is designed to work, that we have this obvious connection in the body, and ignoring it doesn't sort of lend itself to building better functional training. The whole point of functional training was to think differently from isolating the muscles in a Frankenstein type of setting and looking more at how we produce movement in real life. If you believe that the hip thrust is a functional exercise, then you have to go down the road that a pec fly is a functional exercise, a leg extension is a functional exercise, because we're all just trying to just build individual muscles stronger, which may work, which actually may make you move better, but to me it's the very long indirect route of doing so. And I think we miss so many good components upon developing the nervous system, coordination, and other attributes that makes fitness more well-rounded than just getting a burn or a pump. So before we add really load in the equation with the hip bridge, we really want to establish what the good movement pattern from the body is going to be. We're going to teach engagement of the upper body, which you guys should understand is of paramount importance because that's going to stabilize the core to allow the hips to move more efficiently and effectively. Where a lot of people struggle with what's happening in the lower body, partly because of how we cue people, which we'll cover in a couple minutes, but also they just don't understand where their body is in space. So one of the things we're aiming at with this program, the reason we're going to show you the same thing in different environments, is how we can take a principle and then use it time and time again to fix similar problems. A lot of times people see a fix in one area and don't think about it relating into another. So the same thing we're going to do in the hip bridge, we're also going to see in the deadlift because it's teaching similar principles. So again, we just want to show some consistency with what we're doing. So what we've done is place a lighter band around Jessica's feet and a heavier band around her thighs. Now, hopefully you guys understand how bands work. If you change the position from above the thighs to below the thighs, it's a little harder tension. But the reason we want a little heavier tension here is because we want to create separation so that she actually gets some activation in her glutes to start with, and she is around the feet, so she wants to engage the ground with her feet, so she wants, again, tension in the feet. So tension in both bands. And notice how she just repositioned herself. Because if the shins come too far away from the body, she starts changing that shin angle too much, because again, if you want a rather vertical shin, then we're going to get more of the hamstring, we're going to bypass the glutes and probably get into her lumbar spine. That's the only way to elevate her hips. So once she gets that tension, now if I tell her to push through her feet, that feels like a very different drill, doesn't it, Jess? Okay, again, remember tension in the feet, telling her how to bridge her hips up by creating tension from the ground up. We have no lumbar extension. We don't have the flaring of the ribs because we have force and tension stability coming from the right segment of her body. So no matter what progression we show you in the bilateral position, you can always apply the bands as a teaching tool, and it only makes the client more successful and allows them to build that foundation to do more complex exercises. All right, so hip bridging is usually a big deal when it comes to progressing the hip hinge. Obviously, we can't get into a more stable environment than being on the ground. Now, it's amazing to me, this exercise and the progressions that we're going to put forth are probably the most controversial things we're known for with DVRT, because we do look at it quite differently. But if you understand how the human body is designed to move, this should all make a lot of sense. So let's first talk about the fact that I always say words matter. So I'm calling this a hip bridge, not a glute bridge. Just as we don't say a push-up is a chest press, and a lot of these other exercises are isolated muscles, the glutes don't work by themselves, and they don't work by just trying to lift the hips up. So one of the biggest and confusing things for a lot of people is how we cue the exercise initially, because we want to see the hips bridge, not just the glutes become active. And if you understand by everything we've been talking about, the glutes are really a byproduct of how you use your feet. So even if Jessica doesn't actually elevate her hips, if she just tries to push through her feet really hard, what becomes active, Jess? The glutes start to set up and become active. So a big part of removing a lot of the extension to the lumbar spine, or having to say squeeze your glutes, simply comes from getting people to use their feet. Now, Jessica's pretty into their body, so she can have her shoes on. For a lot of your clients, you want to probably get them in minimus shoes or out of their shoes initially, because you want them to learn how to actively grab the ground. Now, in doing so, you want to make sure the shins are pretty much vertical. Now, you can play with this a little bit depending upon the individuality. A lot of times people step way too far out, and they can't get their glutes into the exercise because their legs are too far out. Now, of course, people always ask, Josh, you're asking me to push in my full foot or just my heel? Because a lot of us are taught if we use the heel, you feel more hamstring glute. That may be the case, you might feel some of that, but the problem is no one's actually measured what happens when you actually grab the ground in the foot in a hip bridge. We do it during gait, and when we're walking, the glutes are most active in mid-stance, which makes sense since our foot's going to now project ourselves through space, we're going to get more hip extension. So while I understand a lot of studies have shown you the glutes or the hamstrings become more active with the heel, you should understand now, and by the charts we've shown you in this manual, that if you take the toes away, the midfoot away from the exercise, you're taking away a lot from the entire chain. So again, we want to cue people by pushing and grabbing through their entire foot to press themselves up. So as she pushes through her feet, that's going to create the extension through her hips. Now you notice it was basically impossible for her to go through her lumbar spine, so we can immediately eliminate a lot of the problems that we see in that lumbar extension during the press if we keep it into pressing to the feet rather than back. Just like we talked about in the pressing series, by pushing through the feet, we create that lock upon the pelvis, and then we have it basically where she can't move through her lumbar spine. So that's going to take care of a lot of the bottom half. We'll go through some other variations as well. Let's talk about what's happening up the chain. Now what's happened over time is people do things very commonly as they'll load their pelvis to then do their hip bridge, right? So for one form or another, barbells, dumbbells, whatever it is, if this was just a matter of us wanting to push off ultimate sandbags, then I wouldn't care upon how you're applying load to the body. But we're really teaching you guys about functional movement. The problem with this type of scenario is my core and my glutes are not active with my glutes and my hips at this point. And as we've talked about so many times, it's about the chains that connect the body that produce the outcome that we want. This is very controversial to people because they're like, well, I feel it when it's on my hips. You may feel it in your hips, you're going to feel it in all these variations. The question is, do you start to move better and perform better by doing these drills? And I beg you guys try, you're going to find that you actually start to move better when you think about how the body's actually connected. So how do we start to connect these chains? Simply by using the concept of creating tension in the hands first. So just going to press the bag over her chest, and she's literally going to try to break the handles off the bag. And when she does so, she's a nice tight firm grip, the wrist is neutral, she's not in extension. So she wants to create that tension. Now when she pushes through her feet, she gets to actually connect lats, core, and glutes together in the manner that we are designed to function and perform. So this tension, no saggy back, is really essential in how we layer in foundation. And you know, the nice part is that it's also a shoulder exercise because, again, as you guys learned from the pressing module, connecting the lat, core, and hip is going to improve the shoulder as much as it is the lower body. That's why functional training is so powerful, so we can accomplish so many goals at once. So obviously we can make the bag heavier, but what we could also do is just change the range of motion of the bag. So what we're going to do is challenge her ability to keep the lats and the core connected as she brings the weight into a pullover motion. Now, because range of motion is such a big part of the intensity here, we're going to start with a very small range of motion. Now, if she keeps the tension against the bag, that will keep the load upon the lats. If she allows tension to be lost, that will go into the shoulder. So if we press up again, Jess, what she's going to do is, as she presses through her feet, she's going to allow the bag to come a little bit over her head. Tension, 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 pull down and come down at the same time. So again, see how she didn't lose the tension in the bag. Let's do it again. She can go a little longer range of motion if she feels strong. And back down. So as the bag gets a little bit more leverage overhead, the more stress is being placed upon the hips as well to resist the extension of the body, because your glutes are stabilizers as much as they are prime movers and must actually function, move you through space while stabilizing you at the same time. So this is a great foundation to build the hip bridge from. So when we introduce new implements, the motions may look very familiar or very similar, but they're actually going to be different. So when we have the kettlebells in a moment pressed in the same position, they're different than having the ultimate sandbag because we're not getting that horizontal tension that we did with the bag. So when you don't get as much feedback, it's going to be a little more challenging. But you're going to see some of the different progressions and reasons we're using them. So if Jessica goes ahead and makes sure that bells start closer to her body, just like her press out, she's going to press the bells up to start with. We want the pinkies a little bit towards one another so we can gauge that lat. So now we're just going to again, build that base bridge. So create tension, a lot of tension in the handles, Jess. Go ahead and bridge up by pushing through the feet. So this is obviously the foundation we want to start from, right? Now we have the little independent moving weights. We get a little bit more shoulder work. We can work with the opposite of the legs. So now what we're going to do now is we're going to let Jessica finish her bridge. She's going to bring one arm down, and as she bridges up, she's going to press that bell up. So again, sort of like that alternating press we did the kettlebell before, we're going to do that here with the bridge, because we're wanting to teach pressing is from the ground up, that we're using the glutes, the hamstrings, core to press up. So again, a nice way sort of to introduce proper pressing, but also start to introduce the concepts of the hip hinge with this foundational type of movement. So hopefully it's clear with any of these exercises with the lever bell, changing hand position is the easiest way to change intensity, and it can be quite dramatic in doing so. So again, you don't need a lot of different sizes to make these pretty challenging. Start with a pretty stable base, progress from here. So what we're going to do is add a little bit more movement to the implement itself to actually create a reactive core and pelvic stability foundation to the lower body as we're doing something with the upper body. Meaning, which is what happens in life, right? We want one segment to create stability as we're having mobility and motion in another area. So again, this will be very seamless and actually get fluid over time. Now what Jessica's going to do is she's going to take her mixed grip, meaning that the side by the ball is palm up, side away from the ball, palm down. She's actively going to be trying to break the bar in half as she does it. So she's going to start with the press up first. And as she presses to her feet, she's going to rotate ball side up towards her head. Now see how she keeps locked arms? She's in nice lats are engaged. She's trying to actively create tension here, and then she's going to lower and bring down. So again, you didn't see any shrugging of the shoulders as you did. Let's try again. Bridge and rotate. That immediately engages, but also has her to deal with that changing lever arm upon the lever bell, which makes her core and pelvic reaction different as the weight transitions around her body. So again, we can make the lever arm more drastic, or we can add a little bit more movement with the bell itself. So what we can do is, as she gets into that rotate position, we can add a little bit of overhead chop. And assuming she's creating tension in the feet, just like in our pullover drill, she wants to go ahead and keep everything locked in with the lower body by her feet and keeping the lat engaged at the same time. So now as she bridges up, rotate, now tension, tension, tension. See how that allows her to keep her ribs down, rotate, and back down the ground. Let's do one more just. So again, press, rotate, nice chop, resisting extension through using the feet, and come back down. So again, a nice way to add progression to what's happening in the lower body and trunk as you're adding a little more sophisticated movement with the load in the upper body. So we definitely encourage creativity, but to us, creativity is simply just adding progression based upon principles and concepts we've been teaching all throughout the program. So we can change the angle of the vector force of the band and go into one of our other holding positions into our chops to add a little bit more sophisticated movement to your hip bridge. So Jessica's going to work on the chopping portion. So that's the downward portion. We've talked about those P&F patterns already. She's going to keep her left leg on the ground. So when she bridges up, she'll create tension first, bridge up, and she's going to lift the right leg off the ground as she pulls in that chop. So again, this is a nice, if you guys want to draw a parallel to a half kneeling chop, we're getting a very similar type of a training effect, but we're getting a little bit more grip engagement, we're getting a little bit more hip stability, and we're understanding how to connect these chains in a little bit more challenging manner. You'll see a parallel of that to your max lunge, where we come down the weight to the side, so you see how we build up progressions to more complex movements from different environments that we want you to achieve through in a long-term plan of training. So if we have a chop, we obviously need a lift too. Now the lift is the harder version and going to create more challenge to the pelvis and core stability. So again, the chop is the easier version. So if Jessica goes ahead and creates that tension first, again, don't overwhelm your client with the tension of the band. A little bit of band goes a long ways. Go to position alignment. We're going to bridge up first. One leg comes off the ground. In this case, it tends to be easier keeping that same side there. And then again, coming back to that no position, resetting herself up. So again, looking at making sure we have good angles, that we're not dropping the pelvis. She's good engaging the ground with her foot. She's keeping tension against the bag. She's not creating tension in her upper traps. She's not rotating through that pelvis or starting to get into a lumbar extension because she's losing her foot.